Well, the Constitution of 1973 is an extremely important legal and constitutional text in our history. We saw that Pakistan adopted its first constitution in 1956, but that constitution was abrogated only 2 years later in 1958. Then we had our second constitution in 1962, but given that that constitution was promulgated during a dictatorial regime, that constitution was perhaps did not have the same kind of credibility and popular support that the Constitution of 1973 enjoyed. But the Constitution of 1973 was unanimously passed by a directly elected legislature. So I think that in itself makes the 1973 Constitution extremely significant. And we have seen that notwithstanding three unconstitutional violations and unconstitutional usurpations of power since 1973, the 1973 Constitution has endured till today. So in 1977, in 1999, and in 2007, while we had three different martial law or emergency regimes, we saw that the Constitution of 1973 was never abrogated. It was only held in abeyance. So the fact that the 1973 Constitution has survived and has endured in itself explains the importance of the Constitution of 1973. Moreover, let us not lose sight of the fact that the 1973 Constitution was passed after the dismemberment of Pakistan and after the creation of East Pakistan. So I think it was passed when Pakistan was at its lowest ebb in our history. And given that the Pakistan People's Party had won those elections, the 1971 elections in West Pakistan, and given that the second most important political player at that time was the religious parties, so you see that the Constitution of 1973 is perhaps a reflection of the concessions between these two different groups. It also has certain socialist elements and it also has certain religious elements. So I think that's what makes the Constitution of 1973 extremely interesting, because the Constitution is but a political document. So the 1973 Constitution, like any other constitution throughout the world, shows the important or dominant politics of the day and age in which it was passed. Well, I would contest your assertion as to the Constitution of 1973 being vague and ambiguous. I think there is room for interpretation in every constitution. I think if there was no need to interpret a constitution, then we won't have constitutional courts throughout the world. So the very fact that you have a judiciary that has been entrusted with the task to interpret the constitution throughout the world shows that no legal document can be completely set in stone. There are certain ambiguities, there is a certain room for interpretation. So I don't think that's because of any defect in the manner in which the constitution has been drafted. I think that's just very natural, and that's only inevitable. Now, as far as the question about Article 63A is concerned, I don't think there was enough room, or perhaps any room, to interpret Article 63A. So my personal view is that the recent judgment announced or passed by the Supreme Court in the case concerning Article 63A is entirely inconsistent with the language of Article 63A. And I think the Supreme Court has perhaps not only interpreted, but has effectively rewritten Article 63A of the Constitution. But nonetheless, I don't think any constitution can be set in stone. And because the text of the Constitution does not change, the meaning lurking under the text of the Constitution continues to change with each passing generation. And I think that's the idea of a living constitution, of an evergreen constitution that we see throughout the world. Well, as far as our Constitution is concerned, I think there are a number of important features of our Constitution. For example, our Constitution acknowledges a number of important fundamental rights. So, for example, the right to free speech has been secured by our Constitution. The right to privacy, the right to dignity has been secured by our Constitution. The right to freedom of religion, the right to practice and profess your religion has also been secured in our Constitution. The rights of women and children have been secured in our Constitution. And more importantly, after the 18th Amendment, the right to information has also been secured in our Constitution. Nonetheless, your question about the good and the bad about the Constitution, I think any Constitution is as good or bad as the polity and the public that seeks to enforce that Constitution. I think constitutional provisions, no matter how sacrosanct, would have limited importance if the public does not jealously guard the provisions of the Constitution. And one perhaps disconcerting element that we have seen in our polity in the recent past is that we have been so obsessed with ends that we have often been willing to forego or pay little heed to the means that we use. So I think while our constitution has a number of important safeguards, it is important that the public jealously safeguards those rights. I think we have recently seen that the government has also announced certain plans to introduce lessons about the constitution in our school curriculum as well. So I think once a constitutional culture develops and once the public starts guarding the constitution, I think only then will you be able to really see the effect of the provisions and the words in the constitution. Well, I think, as I said, the constitution is as strong as the polity. And I think what we have seen, because we've had frequent phases of dictatorial regimes where the constitution has been set in abeyance, I think it will take time for our constitutional culture to evolve. I think we often compare ourselves to other countries. There are countries which have had constitutions for hundreds of years. The Constitution of 1973 turns 50 years old today. And even then, we've had at least more than 20 years where the Constitution was held in abeyance. So I think it's important for the Constitution culture to evolve, and that will not happen in a day or two. So I think let us be a little patient with the Constitution. I think the Constitution has achieved a number of things, and there are certain things that the Constitution has perhaps not achieved as yet. But I think we cannot be impatient. We have to give this Constitution and our democratic dispensation some time to evolve. And I think as our democracy evolves, our constitutional culture and our constitutional values will evolve with it.